and welcome to a very special edition of Newsmakers. The Newsmaker today is the Bank of International Settlements. It's actually an international organization which is the central bank of all central banks, a kind of a knowledge institution which coordinates monetary policy, financial stability, and its new baby is the Finternet, which is trying international payments to get smoother. But more on that later. My guest is the chief of the BIS, Dr. Agustin Carstens.
Hello, Latha. A pleasure to be in your program.
Thank you very much, sir. A word about you. Agustin Carstens is perhaps the best central banker the world can have to head the BIS. He has been the central banker, the governor of the Bank of Mexico, the finance minister of Mexico. He has been managing director at the IMF. He has been member of the Financial Stability Board, continues to be, and of course is heading the BIS since 2017. So the best person from whom we can get an idea of central banking, monetary policy and financial stability. Dr. Carstens, my first question is not going to be on the economy or on the interesting payment system that you're trying to put in place, but a more theoretical question. Flexible inflation targeting, which India embarked on just 9 years ago, we think it's very successful. But within India, there are people who are doubting whether inflation targeting is a good idea because food is not something the RBI can control, and food is a large part of India's index. So there are opposing views. What's your view on inflation targeting?
Well, first of all, I think it has been a tremendously successful methodology and strategy to follow to stabilize inflation. I mean, I think that if you compare the world economy from the, 40, 50 years ago to today, one of the key aspects is the absence of relatively high inflation in many countries. And this was achieved primarily because of inflation targeting. Inflation targeting basically means, in a very simple way so that people understand, is for the central bank to say, I have a set of instruments, I will use the instruments in a way so that I can assure you that inflation will not be higher than X%, or it will be contained in a certain range. Flexible, it is flexible sometimes from the point of view of the flexibility of the use of the instruments, but also sometimes it is flexible from the fact that to have a very specific point inflation target is difficult and it's risky because, as you well mentioned, there are many prices that do not depend on monetary policy. But what is really important is that the development of those prices can affect inflationary expectations, and therefore it can contaminate the rest of the prices in the economy. Therefore, the central bank cannot ignore these prices, in the case of India, for example, food, because it affects expectations. And at the same time, inflation expectation relies on the trust that people have on the scheme. Now, a scheme would be not very good if the central bank says, I will mind these prices, but not these other prices. The person in the street will say, well, that doesn't make sense to me because I face all the prices, not only the one you choose. That's why it has to be integrated, and I think it makes sense and it works.
The Reserve Bank of India is a full-service central bank.
Absolutely.
I'll come to that in a minute. They are celebrating 90 years, and I will need your comment. But the more important question is the financial stability of the world or of global markets at this point in time. We have seen a lot of exuberance in equity markets. In the US, we've had those magnificent IT stocks. We've had a roaring equity market in India as well. At this juncture, are you worried about financial stability? Any red flags you see hidden in plain sight?
Well, there is a sector in the financial system where we don't have a very good sight, a very good perspective, and that is what is called the non-bank financial intermediation sector. Basically, here we're talking about activities like hedge funds, like private equity, private banking, sometimes even insurance, asset management, and so on. Many of these activities are not regulated or they are not supervised fully, but that doesn't mean that they don't take sometimes heavy risks and that at some point those risks can materialize. In particular, the concern is that sometimes maturity mismatches are present, yes, and at the same time there can be over-leveraging. And whenever you have dislocations in the markets or economic shocks, those risks can materialize. Now, they could have at some point a systemic impact because the non-bank financial intermediation is not fully dislocated from the banking system. The banking system is the one that we care the most because usually that's the dominant, as it is the case in India. Yes. And it also is because it has the most access to the population. But oftentimes the banking system provides financing to the non-bank financial intermediation. And if you have a major problem in non-financial intermediation, could contaminate the banking intermediation. So we need to have a comprehensive view and try to use our instruments to guarantee financial stability in all scenarios.
Let me ask you the more optimistic question on economic growth. It does look, the last number we got from the United States was 3% GDP growth for the just ended quarter. Do you think that risks of recession in the world are actually overblown and we are quite likely to have a soft landing?
Well, let me again also follow you with a positive note. I think, yes, we have been faring better than what we anticipated. I think that the coordinated monetary tightening in the world to address a global inflation spur has had not as important impact on economic growth. Now, at the same time, I have to say there is a lot of heterogeneity in the world. Yes. I mean, I think one very remarkable case is, of course, India, that is probably the highest growing economy in the world. The US is also doing extremely well. Many emerging markets are doing well. But you cannot say the same of some notable economies in the world. Europe is in a soft patch, not in recession, but growing relatively low rates. And then we have the second largest economy in the world, China, that is really going through difficult times. So all in all, we can feel optimistic. But there are some areas or some parts of the world where growth has been, I would say, substandard. Mm-hmm.
Now, I agree that there will be, economies moving in different speeds. But overall, you don't see risks like the 2008 risks which can kind of impact markets. Nothing like that is on the cards.
No, not at all. I mean, I think what has happened in this post-COVID period is the collective action of the central banks was very decisive, was opportune, and it really had a very solid impact on inflation, and it's being brought under control relatively well. I think some of the factors that generated inflation turned out to be transitory, mm-hmm. and that helped. But the monetary policy actions implemented also played a very important role. There is inflation expectations are relatively stable. Interest rates are starting to come down, and that will support growth. At the same time, usually when you have a major shock or crisis, you suffer also of financial instability. And in this case, we didn't suffer financial instability. And that is because we entered this post-COVID period with a very strong financial system.
Yes.
And that tells us that the efforts that we implemented after the GFC are paying returns in terms of stability.
Okay. That's good to hear. If one of the best central bankers doesn't see red flags, that's a positive. You alluded to India in passing. Can you elaborate? Something's going right here. We are having a better rate of growth, a 7% rate of growth for the past few years. Any further comments? What seems to be going right here?
Well, I think many things are going right here. I mean, I think it's very refreshing to come to a country where you see very positive indices right and left. I mean, I think that you have followed a balanced process of development from a macro point of view. You have had a good fiscal policy from the point of view, yes, it's in deficit and so on and so forth, but it is moderated, but also the quality of expenditure is adequate. So just coming here, you see the development of infrastructure, and infrastructure definitely will support the economic growth. You have inflation under control. Financial intermediation is working well. And then you see also major efforts in different regions in the economy, trying to, from a structural point of view, make the Indian economy more productive, more efficient. And I think that is being reflected in rate growth. And in that way also you take advantage of the fact that you have a young population, a thriving population, and at the end that materializes in terms of economic growth.
Back to the special edition of Newsmakers. My guest is Dr. Agustin Carstens, the head of the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements. Well, with that, let me come to a project which is after your own heart and our hearts too, the Finternet. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a project which Dr. Carstens and Nandan Nilekani of India have tried to put together. It's an international payment system, a payment plus system. Dr. Carstens, first tell us, this seems to be a labor of love for you. Tell us what you have in mind in terms of the Finternet. What is the BIS trying?
Well, I mean, I think, let me make an emphasis on what you said, that this is a payment plus effort. I mean, I think during the last many years, at least a decade, in the different parts of the world, there has been major efforts to incorporate technology into the financial practices. But if we compare that effort with other developments, for example, the development of the iPhone, where you can do many things out of your handheld device, we cannot say that that is the case in financial transactions. You know, I remember 15 years ago, last time, or one of my first times I came here to India, to call to Mexico was almost impossible. Yesterday I called my mother through WhatsApp in 3 seconds. You know, so that's a dramatic development. The same thing could happen, should happen in the payment system. Now, we have made efforts starting mostly through payments. And I think the developments that you have here in India are top of the class. I mean, all what you have done with the DPI and UPI is really remarkable. Now, the financial system is not limited to payments. There is many other transactions, financial transactions, that are important. And you know, here in India, there has been a lot of debate and progress in terms of inclusion, but we measure inclusion by the access that the population have to accounts, sometimes how much they use it. But you know, if you go through the range of financial transactions and you go to more complicated transactions, the figures of inclusion drops dramatically. And a lot of this is just because to bring financial services to the population, especially the most sophisticated ones, are very expensive. Transaction costs are very, very high. Now, technology can change that, you know. We have, in technology and thinking in a broader sense, technology conditioned a lot the way we organize financial services. Are financial services that are more dominated by concerns of the intermediary or the type of operation? But what I discussed with Nandan, and he was absolutely fabulous in this process, is the fact that we wanted to do a system or build or have a vision, more than any, articulate a vision where the financial system is concentrated in the individual, where the individual can do any type of transactions with anybody they want, no matter in which location, at any time. Just like the way you use your iPhone. Now, what is very significant is that technology is there. Basically, by using tokenized assets or tokenization of financial assets and creating unified ledgers, you can really build an architecture where, from a technological point of view, this vision can materialize. So, you know, and it has been a fabulous interaction with Nandan. It was an effort of bringing financial minds together with technological minds. So the way this happened is that I wrote a paper presented in Singapore last year. I came to the G20 here in Bangalore. I met with Nandan, he's a very dear friend, and I said, Nandan, how do you do this, bring this into reality? And he said, no problem, we can do this very quickly, you know. So I think in this way, that's also another interesting way where finance can contribute with technology and put something on the table. It's a steep way up.
Yes. At the moment, you still have the SWIFT. You still have to go through several banks, and a transaction between two countries can take several days. Do you see, you know, for instance, India-Singapore transaction happening quickly with India's UPI and Singapore's, I think, PayU or something, or likewise in the US, the Fed now? Do you see that happening where, you know, inter-country transactions can happen quickly?
I think at this stage, something where technology is helping us a lot is that there are many costs in cross-border transactions from the point of view of know your client and anti-money laundering and combating the financial of terrorism. Now that is a task, the surveillance of that's a task that can be digitalized and can be made extremely efficient, even more now with artificial intelligence. So we are cutting costs there. Now, some of the designs of these projects also is trying to make simpler the foreign exchange transaction. That is another leg of a cross-border payment that usually is complex and is expensive. And then obviously the different communications, dispute settlements, and so on and so forth. The nitty-gritty becomes very complex very soon. But we are really dwelling through it, and I think we're making fast progress.
Okay. Well, but there is a political angle to it as well. You know, especially after the COVID and the high fiscal deficit in the United States, the Ukraine war, the derecognition of Russian assets, there is a bit of a scare about dollar as a reserve currency. That also has propelled bilateral, you know, search for bilateral payments without going through you know, the central clearing in the United States. Do you see at all the dollar, the significance of the dollar, or the predominance of the dollar reducing?
I don't think so. I mean, at the end of the day, the dollar has developed the main avenues. At the end of the day, financial transactions depend on the credibility of the currency. And at the international level, there is no more credible and reliable currency than the US dollar. And my strong feeling or belief is that the dollar will prevail as the main payment, main currency in the international financial system.
Okay. Well, to come back to alternative payment systems, India's betting a lot on the CBDC. We have some kind of retail CBDC, but it's a pilot. Do you see CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, making some headway in terms of country payments?
Eventually, I think CBDC could be used in payments, mostly at the wholesale level. Now, CBDC at the end of the day is a different technological representation of money. It's not a new currency, So, so at the end of the day, you have to really conceptualize a CBDC in that respect. Is a more efficient representation of money, but at the end of the day, it cannot change the nature of the currencies that are behind those CBDCs.
Yes, I guess along with Finternet, maybe one day it can make some headway. But CBDCs in India at least were conceived more to draw people away from cryptocurrencies.
Yes.
Do you think that threat is over? At one time it looked like it would become a rival mode of payment. Is that something that worries you?
Definitely. I mean, it's a quest where we cannot leave our guard down. Yes. I think the main problem is that cyber currencies are represented or presented as a substitute for fiat currency without the attributes of fiat currency. And therefore, many people can have losses as it has materialized. On top of the fact that many of these payment vehicles or these vehicles are used to conduct illegal transactions. Therefore, it's not desirable at all that you have avenues out there where illegal transactions can take place. For example, ransom payments for cyber attacks and narco trafficking, different type of trafficking, and so on and so forth. That's why I think that we really need to put a rein on cyber currencies. It is clear that in many cases, those cyber currencies do not comply with the three attributes of money, which is a good means of payment, a good store of value, a good unit of account. Some have matured and have become an investment or speculative alternative. In some cases, they are being regulated, and so they have found their way into broader financial markets. But I think that we should not allow them to proliferate in a way that can make people incur losses or be deceived.
Okay. Well, I'm running out of time. Just a final question. Would you worry that the way political international relations are evolving, there is a big threat to the growth of world trade? We don't know how the US elections will go, but there are threats of higher tariffs, especially against China or even generally. Would you worry that we are in a space where international trade is threatened and therefore the world economic growth pace?
Yeah, I have to recognize that in the last several years we have seen a fragmentation in the global economy, and that's not good for the world as a whole. So yeah, regretfully I have to say that it is a subject matter that could hinder economic growth and development.
We do hope the world will move away from the brink if it were to find itself in that position. Thank you very much, Dr. Carstens, for spending time with us at CNBC-TV18. It's a signal honor for us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for the opportunity.